Well, we said it and say it time and time again that corporal punishment doesn't work. It doesn't work for a lot of reasons. One is it produces a wariness of a child that they don't really learn. What they do is learn to be vigilant. Is anybody watching me? Does anybody see what I'm doing? Can I get away with this? It doesn't really teach them any kind of internal moral standards or any internal control. It also deprives the child of the experience of pleasure. When you're inflicting pain, there's a biological response to pain that's antithetical to the biological response of experiencing pleasure. And when the body is responding to pain, or it's in its fight or flight state, it's not in a mode to learn. Learning requires a different physiological response than responding to pain. So it really shuts the body down from learning when you inflict pain on a human being. It doesn't open the body up to learning physiologically. So those are its major limitations. But any way you slice it, whether you look at it sociologically, psychologically, or biologically, inflicting pain on another human being doesn't open them up to a positive learning experience. Well, there's no question that if you want to stop aversive behavior, hit somebody. And if you hit them hard enough and you hurt them, or you surprise them or shock them, they will stop the aversive behavior and respond to the pain. So there seems to be, if you take a very short time frame, an effectiveness of using physical punishment on kids or on anybody. But over the long haul, it's quite obvious that it doesn't work because you have to go back and do it again. What we find, if physical punishment worked, you could hit a child when the child was 1 or 2 years of age. You wouldn't have to do it anymore. If I gave you a horribly tasting thing out of my refrigerator and the taste was just incredibly aversive, you would be unlikely to want anything out of my refrigerator again. So the aversive taste would be effective. The aversive smell could be effective. But the aversive effect of corporal punishment isn't very long lasting because kids go back and do the same things. They may not touch the stove again, but they'll go back and misbehave again. So it's very clear that in the long run, corporal punishment does not work to change behavior.
The other side effect of the painful aspect of punishment, physical punishment, is that it makes less painful consequences less effective. So what is that child going to do when the school doesn't allow physical punishment? The child can act up, the teacher puts them in timeout or sends them to the principal, and the child says, "Ha, this doesn't matter to me." So what parents don't realize they're doing is they're actually making ineffective all the other things that they might be able to use. One of the things that I feel sad about as a pediatrician is that people actually don't want to hit their children but don't know what to do instead. In fact, even though 93% of people in the United States have endorsed physical punishment, 85% of those say they wish they had an alternative that worked. They don't understand that what they're using doesn't work, and they don't have the information, the parenting education, and the support to use the strategies that do work. They work better than corporal punishment without the side effects unless we teach them. This is not just the pediatrician's job. It should be a job for the schools, it should be a job for the churches, it should be a job for the media. There are lots of ways that we can get to help people understand things that they can do better as parents and not be tied in to just the ways that they were disciplined when they were growing up.
So when I discuss the use of physical punishment in my classes, I like to ask my students, well, when would you need to use physical punishment or spanking to discipline a child? And almost invariably, some student will say, well, but you have to do it to prevent a child from running in the street or they'll get hurt. And so I say, all right, well, consider that. You have a child, 2 years old, she runs in the street, and you grab her and spank her really well and say, no, don't do that, you could get hurt. Would you feel after that perfectly comfortable letting your child play by the street while you go in the house and fix dinner? And of course, every student says, well, of course not. They might just run in the street again. And so I say, well, then what good was spanking the child? What good did spanking the child do? If you cannot trust that your physical punishment of the child has taught them the lesson that you want them to teach. All it has done is inflicted pain, perhaps contributed negatively to your relationship with your child. I point out to them the research that a psychologist, Jack Embry, did that was funded by the American Automobile Association's Foundation on Pedestrian Safety, where he found that in some cases children who were spanked for running in the street actually ran in the street more than children who were not spanked. Right? That it became an issue that some children, particularly sort of acting out children, used that as a way of getting their parents' attention. Well, that was a sure way to get their parents' attention, to run in the street. Gets mom real excited. Right? And so, in fact, ironically, some children, even though the parents were trying to stop them from running in the street, in fact, increased the likelihood that they would run in the street, and obviously increased the risk of significant harm to the child.
Even those researchers who studied spanking, and the few of them in terms of the vast majority, there's just very, very few legitimate researchers who keep supporting, finding it somehow in their results that spanking doesn't do a lot of harm if it's at its, quotes, moderate level, never define what moderate is. And that brings us to a major point. A parent comes into my office and says, listen, my kid's always loses his temper, he fights at school, he can't seem to control himself, we need to do something. So the first thing I do is start to get a family history. And of course, the first thing I say to them, well, which of you loses your temper? And of course, one of the parents does. Which of you blows up? One of the parents does. Which of you has trouble controlling themselves? One of them does. And which of your parents, I'll say to that one, and I'll find one of their parents. Not always, but almost all the time. And then I'll say, you know, I'll help them to understand. Then I'll say, well, how often do you hit your kid? And they may say, well, not too often. I'll say, well, how often? Well, about average. I'll say, well, tell me how many, is it once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, you know, once a month, whatever. Invariably say, well, about 3 or 4 times a week, you know, or some high amount like that. And I'll say, well, do you think that's normal, the average? They say, yeah, that's what happened in my house. It's a lot less than I got. And I say, then I'll say, well, tell me something. Give me a behavior that you punished your kid for, you spank you. They'll say maybe cursing. And saying, well, when's the last time the child cursed? Well, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And when's the time they cursed before that? And we'll go back and I'll say, well, tell me something. A punishment is something that stops a misbehavior from occurring. Is the spanking a punishment? Is it working? And invariably, of course, they'll say no. And I'll say, well, why do you do it? And the answer is, because I don't know what else to do. And what they've done, they've got a cycle of violence.